The night watchman who guarded what wasn't there. Pittsburgh's invisible factory, 1902. Samuel Kowalski walked his rounds at exactly 2:17 a.m., lantern swinging in steady rhythm as he checked each empty lot along Carson Street in Pittsburgh's South Side. But every night, the same impossible sight greeted him at the corner of 18th Street, the silhouette of a massive steel factory, with smokestacks billowing dark clouds against the starlit sky, complete with the glow of furnaces and the rhythmic hammering of machinery. According to every city record, building permit, and property deed, nothing stood on that corner except an empty field that had been vacant since the Panic of 1893. Yet Samuel had been hired by the Carnegie Steel Company to guard this non-existent factory for 6 months, receiving regular paychecks to patrol a facility that officially didn't exist. The mystery began in March 1902, when Samuel answered a classified advertisement in the Pittsburgh press seeking an experienced night watchman for industrial security work. The pay was exceptional, $15 per week, nearly double the standard rate for similar positions in Pittsburgh's booming steel district. The interview took place in a cramped office above Muller's hardware store, conducted by a thin man in an expensive suit who identified himself only as Mr. Henderson from Carnegie Steel's Special Projects Division. Henderson explained that the position involved guarding a new experimental facility that Carnegie was operating under strict secrecy to prevent industrial espionage from competitors. The factory produced specialized steel alloys using revolutionary techniques that could transform American manufacturing if they remained protected from corporate spies and foreign agents. Samuel's job would be to patrol the facility's perimeter from midnight to dawn, ensuring that no unauthorized persons gained access to the property or observed the experimental processes. The unusual aspects of the position became apparent on Samuel's first night. Henderson had provided him with detailed maps showing the factory's layout, a complex of 5 buildings connected by covered walkways, with 2 massive furnaces, multiple workshops, and a rail siding for shipping finished products. But when Samuel arrived at the specified address on Carson Street, he found only an empty lot overgrown with weeds and scattered with the rusted remnants of machinery from some long-defunct enterprise. Samuel initially assumed he had been given incorrect directions, but as he stood in the empty field consulting his maps, something extraordinary happened. At exactly midnight, the air in front of him began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Gradually, the outline of buildings began to materialize, first as faint shadows, then as increasingly solid structures that seemed to emerge from thin air. Within 10 minutes, a complete industrial facility stood before him, complete with glowing windows, smoking chimneys, and the unmistakable sounds of heavy machinery in operation. The factory that materialized each midnight was unlike any industrial facility Samuel had encountered during his 20 years of experience in Pittsburgh's steel district. The buildings seemed to be constructed from materials that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating structures that were visible but somehow darker than the surrounding darkness. The machinery inside operated with perfect precision but produced no visible products. Samuel never saw finished steel being loaded for shipment, never observed raw materials being delivered, never witnessed workers arriving for shifts. But the most disturbing aspect of the midnight factory was the workers themselves. Through the windows, Samuel could see figures moving through the workshops, operating furnaces and machinery with practiced efficiency. These workers appeared to be wearing standard industrial clothing and following normal manufacturing procedures, but they moved with an unnatural smoothness that made Samuel's skin crawl. Their shadows seemed disconnected from their bodies, and they never acknowledged his presence even when he passed directly in front of the windows during his patrols. Samuel maintained detailed logs of his observations, noting the times when different areas of the factory showed activity, recording the sounds and smells emanating from various workshops, and documenting the procedures he witnessed through the windows. His reports were submitted weekly to Mr. Henderson, who always accepted them with satisfaction, but never provided feedback or additional instructions about Samuel's duties. The first indication that something was deeply wrong came in August when Samuel attempted to enter one of the factory buildings during his rounds. The door, which appeared solid and was equipped with a proper handle and lock, offered no resistance to his touch. Samuel's hand passed through the door as if it were made of fog, despite the fact that his eyes clearly showed a substantial wooden barrier. The entire factory was somehow both visually present and physically non-existent. This discovery led Samuel to conduct systematic experiments to determine the nature of the facility he was guarding. He threw rocks at the factory windows and watched them pass through the glass without causing damage or making sound. He held his lantern close to the factory walls and observed that the light passed through the apparently solid surfaces without casting shadows. Most unsettling of all, when he walked through the spaces occupied by the factory buildings, he could feel temperature changes and air currents that suggested the presence of massive machinery, even though nothing physical was actually there. Before I continue with Samuel's shocking discovery about what he was really guarding, I need to know you're prepared for this revelation. If you've ever worked a job where you suspected your employer wasn't telling you the complete truth about what you were really doing, write "I question everything" in the comments along with your city. Subscribe now, because what Samuel learned about Pittsburgh's invisible factory will change everything you thought you knew about the relationship between industrial power and worker exploitation. Samuel's investigation into the true nature of his employment led him to the Carnegie Library, where he spent his free hours researching the history of the empty lot he was paid to guard. City records revealed that the site had indeed been home to an industrial facility, the Allegheny Specialty Steel Works, which had operated from 1885 to 1893, before closing during the economic panic that devastated many smaller manufacturers. But the newspaper accounts of Allegheny Specialty Steel's closure told a disturbing story. The factory hadn't simply shut down due to financial difficulties. It had been the site of a massive industrial accident that had killed 47 workers and injured dozens more. On November 15, 1893, an experimental furnace designed to produce ultra-high temperature steel alloys had exploded, destroying most of the facility and trapping workers in collapsing buildings and molten metal flows. The newspaper reports described heroic rescue efforts that continued for 3 days, but many bodies were never recovered from the wreckage. The extreme heat generated by the experimental furnace had created conditions that made recovery impossible in some areas of the factory. Families of missing workers were told that their relatives had been consumed entirely by the accident, leaving no remains to bury or mourn. More troubling than the accident itself was the response from Allegheny Specialty Steel's ownership. Rather than accepting responsibility for the experimental procedures that had caused the explosion, company officials blamed the disaster on worker negligence and sabotage. Families of dead and injured workers received no compensation, and the company successfully avoided legal liability by claiming that the workers had been conducting unauthorized experiments without management knowledge. Samuel realized that he wasn't guarding an experimental Carnegie Steel facility at all. He was being paid to patrol the site of a mass industrial death, and the factory that materialized each midnight was somehow connected to the 47 workers who had died in the 1893 explosion. But this understanding raised more questions than it answered. Who was Mr. Henderson, and why was he paying Samuel to guard the ghosts of dead workers? What was the purpose of maintaining security around a phantom factory that had been destroyed 9 years earlier? The answer came when Samuel decided to follow the spectral workers when their shift ended each morning. Just before dawn, the phantom workers would file out of the invisible factory and walk in orderly lines toward the Monongahela River. Samuel trailed them at a distance, watching as they descended to the riverbank and disappeared into what appeared to be a barge that was as invisible and intangible as the factory itself. But Samuel's investigation revealed that this phantom barge followed a regular schedule, departing the Carson Street site each morning at exactly 5:30 a.m. and traveling downriver toward the massive Carnegie Steel works at Homestead. The phantom workers were apparently continuing to report for duty at Carnegie facilities, despite having died in an industrial accident 9 years earlier. This discovery led Samuel to understand that his job wasn't security work at all. It was spiritual labor management. Someone was employing him to ensure that the phantom workers maintained their routine, continuing to perform industrial work even in death. The invisible factory wasn't producing steel products. It was producing phantom labor that somehow benefited Carnegie Steel's operations at other facilities. Samuel began observing the Carnegie works at Homestead during daylight hours, looking for signs of phantom worker activity. What he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions. The Homestead facility was operating at production levels that should have been impossible with its documented workforce. Official employment records showed approximately 800 workers, but production statistics suggested the labor output of at least 1,200 people. The additional productivity was coming from phantom workers, the spirits of industrial accident victims from throughout Pittsburgh's Steel District, who continued to perform labor in death. Samuel's investigation revealed that similar security positions existed at the sites of other industrial disasters throughout the region. Night watchmen were being employed to maintain the routines of dead workers, ensuring that their phantom labor continued to contribute to steel production. But Samuel's role in this system wasn't just passive observation. His nightly patrols served to reinforce the phantom workers' sense of routine and purpose, preventing them from realizing that they had died and moving on to whatever existence awaited them after death. By treating the phantom factory as a real facility requiring security, Samuel was helping to maintain the illusion that kept dead workers trapped in perpetual industrial labor. The moral implications of this discovery were staggering. Samuel was being paid to help exploit workers who had died in industrial accidents caused by their employers' negligence and greed. These phantom workers were continuing to generate profits for the same companies that had killed them, and they were being prevented from finding peace in death by the very security systems that were supposed to protect them. Samuel faced a choice that would determine not only his own future, but the spiritual fate of 47 workers who had died believing their deaths were meaningless accidents rather than the result of systematic corporate negligence. He could continue collecting his exceptional wages for maintaining the phantom factory routine, or he could find a way to reveal the truth to the trapped workers and help them escape their supernatural bondage. The decision became urgent when Samuel learned that Mr. Henderson was planning to expand the phantom labor system to other industrial accident sites throughout Pennsylvania. The success of the Pittsburgh operation had attracted attention from steel companies across the region, all of whom wanted to harness the labor of their own industrial accident victims. Samuel's cooperation was crucial to these expansion plans because his detailed logs had provided a template for managing phantom worker routines. But Samuel also discovered that he wasn't the only night watchman who had stumbled upon the truth about phantom labor exploitation. Henderson's organization employed dozens of security workers at industrial disaster sites throughout the region, and several of them had begun questioning the nature of their assignments. Samuel realized that he could organize these workers to sabotage the phantom labor system from within. The plan Samuel developed was both simple and dangerous. If the night watchmen at various phantom factory sites simultaneously broke the routines that kept dead workers trapped in perpetual labor, the phantom workers might realize they had died and find release from their supernatural bondage. But this coordinated action would also expose the watchmen to retaliation from Henderson's organization and the industrial interests that profited from phantom labor. Samuel began reaching out to other night watchmen through coded messages left at locations where phantom workers congregated. His communications revealed the true nature of their employment and invited participation in a coordinated effort to free the trapped spirits. The response was overwhelming. Nearly every watchman who learned the truth about phantom labor immediately agreed to help expose and destroy the system. The liberation of Pittsburgh's phantom workers was scheduled for November 15, 1902. Samuel and his fellow watchmen would simultaneously reveal the truth to phantom workers at their respective sites, breaking the illusions that kept dead workers trapped in perpetual industrial labor. But on the night before the planned liberation, Samuel received an unexpected visitor at the phantom factory. Mr. Henderson arrived just after midnight, accompanied by two men who carried themselves like former soldiers or police officers. Henderson explained that Samuel's investigation had been detected and that his continued cooperation was no longer optional. Henderson revealed that the phantom labor system was more extensive and important than Samuel had understood. The additional productivity generated by phantom workers wasn't just increasing profits for individual steel companies. It was providing the margin of production capacity that allowed American industry to compete with European manufacturers. Disrupting the phantom labor system would damage America's position in global markets and potentially cause economic recession. More troubling, Henderson explained that the phantom workers themselves weren't entirely innocent victims. Many of them had died while participating in industrial sabotage or labor organizing activities that threatened their employers' interests. Their continued labor in death was a form of cosmic justice that ensured their disruptive activities couldn't continue beyond the grave. But Samuel had learned enough about the actual circumstances of the Allegheny specialty steel explosion to know that Henderson's justifications were lies. The workers had died because company officials had ordered them to operate experimental equipment without proper safety precautions, not because they were engaged in sabotage. The phantom labor system was simply another form of the same exploitation that had killed them in life. The confrontation with Henderson and his enforcers forced Samuel to make an immediate decision. He could submit to continued participation in phantom labor exploitation, or he could act immediately to free the trapped workers, knowing that his own safety and possibly his life would be forfeit. Samuel chose liberation over personal security. As Henderson and his men watched, Samuel walked directly into the phantom factory and began speaking to the phantom workers, explaining that they had died 9 years earlier and were being exploited by the same companies that had caused their deaths. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the phantom workers realized their true situation, they began to fade from visibility, finally released to whatever existence awaited them beyond death. The collapse of the phantom labor system at the Carson Street site triggered similar collapses at facilities throughout Pittsburgh as other night watchmen implemented their coordinated liberation plan. Within hours, phantom workers at dozens of industrial disaster sites had been freed from supernatural bondage, causing immediate disruptions in steel production throughout the region. Henderson and his organization attempted to prevent further damage to the phantom labor system by eliminating the night watchmen who had participated in the liberation effort. But Samuel and his colleagues had prepared for this retaliation by documenting their experiences and distributing copies of their evidence to newspapers, labor organizations, and government officials throughout Pennsylvania. The exposure of the phantom labor system created the largest industrial scandal in American history. Congressional investigations revealed that major steel companies had been systematically exploiting the labor of industrial accident victims for nearly a decade, generating millions of dollars in profits from the work of dead employees. The spiritual and legal implications were unprecedented. So should American law address the exploitation of deceased workers? The political response to the phantom labor scandal led to fundamental changes in American industrial safety regulations and workers' compensation systems. The realization that companies had been literally working their employees to death and then continuing to exploit their labor beyond the grave created public outrage that forced comprehensive reforms. Samuel Kowalski became a key witness in the congressional investigations and legal proceedings that followed the phantom labor expose. His detailed logs and documentation provided crucial evidence about how the exploitation system had operated and who had been responsible for maintaining it. His testimony helped establish legal precedents for corporate responsibility that extended beyond the death of employees. But perhaps Samuel's most important contribution was his demonstration that individual workers could organize effectively to protect not only their own interests, but the dignity and rights of deceased colleagues. The coordination between night watchmen at different phantom labor sites showed that even the most isolated and seemingly powerless workers could challenge systematic exploitation when they understood the true nature of their situation. The phantom labor scandal also revealed the extent to which American industrial growth had depended on hidden forms of worker exploitation. The sudden loss of phantom worker productivity caused temporary disruptions in steel production that forced companies to hire additional living workers and improve working conditions to maintain output levels. This demonstrated that phantom labor had been suppressing wages and employment opportunities for living workers by providing employers with access to free supernatural labor. Modern historians studying the phantom labor scandal have found evidence that similar systems operated in other industrialized countries during the same period, suggesting that the exploitation of dead workers was a global phenomenon associated with rapid industrial development. The American response to phantom labor exposure influenced international labor standards and workers' rights movements throughout the early 20th century. Samuel continued working in industrial security until his retirement in 1934, but he never again accepted employment without thoroughly investigating the true nature of his duties. He became an advocate for transparency in labor relations and helped establish worker education programs that taught employees to recognize and resist various forms of exploitation. The site of the former Allegheny Specialty Steel Works remained vacant after the phantom workers were liberated, but it became a gathering place for labor organizers and workers' rights activists. A memorial erected in 1925 honors the 47 workers who died in the 1893 explosion and acknowledges their continued exploitation beyond death. The memorial serves as a reminder that worker dignity must be protected not only in life, but in whatever existence follows death. The phantom labor scandal fundamentally changed how Americans thought about the relationship between employers and employees. The realization that some companies were willing to exploit workers, even after death, created lasting skepticism about corporate motives and led to stronger legal protections for worker rights. The scandal also contributed to growing support for organized labor and collective bargaining as necessary protections against employer exploitation. If this story has made you more aware of the ways that workers can be exploited by employers who hide the true nature of their operations, please share it with others who need to understand these dynamics. Subscribe for more historical cases where ordinary workers uncovered systematic exploitation and fought to protect their colleagues and communities. Before you go, take a moment to consider, are there aspects of your own work or employment situation that you don't fully understand? Are you being asked to participate in activities or systems without being given complete information about their purposes and consequences? Samuel Kowalski's experience with phantom labor reminds us that the most harmful forms of exploitation often depend on worker ignorance about the true nature of their employment. Remember, Samuel's most powerful tool wasn't special knowledge or political authority, it was his willingness to investigate discrepancies that others ignored
and his courage to act on uncomfortable truths once he understood them. In our modern economy, where complex corporate structures and technological systems can obscure the real impacts of our work, his example of persistent investigation and moral courage remains as relevant as ever. Next week, we'll explore another case where a single worker's investigation exposed systematic exploitation that had been hidden behind legitimate-seeming business operations. Until then, remember that the most important questions about your work aren't just about wages and working conditions. They're about whether your labor is being used in ways that align with your values and contribute to the kind of world you want to help create.